Alright guys, been reading in 2 Samuel, and sometimes when I'm reading through some of these, narrative or historical type books, um, if nothing really jumps out at me, particularly in reference to David, you can also go to the book of Psalms, because a lot of the book of Psalms was written by David, and it was written during that time frame when these types of things were going on. For instance, Psalm 51 was written in reference to David's sin um, with Bathsheba and Uriah and so on and so forth. And you can look at Psalm 51 and see how that goes. But today, what I was kind of reading a little bit was Psalm 56, and David is basically being pursued by guys that are trying to kill him, and again, it seems to be happening a lot. And it says, "Be merciful unto me, O God, for man would swallow me up. He fighting daily oppresses me. Mine enemies would daily swallow me up, for they may be many that fight against me, O thou most high." So, one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out here is that it's these men that are pursuing David, but notice who it is that David is asking for help from. He's going to God. He's not seeking other advice. He's not trying to reason with the men. He's going before God with his problem, and understanding that it's God who sovereignly is in control of all this. And in verse 3 he says, "What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. In God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me." And one of the things that we see here is that David is basically, he's kind of stating something that Jesus had said as well, when Jesus had told us, fear not what man can do to the body, but fear what your heavenly Father can do to the soul. And David is basically kind of stating that here. He says, in God I will praise his word. In God I will put my trust. But he says, I will not fear what flesh can do, what man can do to me. And he states that again later on in this chapter as well. But one of the things that I wanted to point out as well, it says, "What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee." So here it is, David, he's this man of God, killed Goliath, has won all these many battles. The women in town used to sing these songs, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. But even David, had moments of fear. Even David was afraid. That's not something that I think that we have any control over. The Bible tells us to fear not, but the implication being is that you're being told to fear not because you fear. So fear is something that we all experience, but it's what we do with that fear that really sets us apart. In the case of David here, he puts his trust in God. He acknowledges his fear, but then he puts his trust in God. And then something else that kind of stood out to me was the last two verses. In verses 12 and 13 it says, "Thy vows are upon me, O God. I will render praises unto thee. For thou hast delivered my soul from death. Wilt not thou deliver my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living?" And I think about this in context to a lot of times we have a tendency to acknowledge our salvation, acknowledge our relationship before God, but then we act as if he's completely divorced from other aspects of our lives, our jobs, our day-to-day activities, whether or not we can pay the rent, or we can pay the electric, or we can put food on the table, or things like this that are quite frankly trivial in comparison to the fact that he is able to save our soul from death. And that's what David is acknowledging here, is essentially he's kind of stating a verse of eternal security when he says, "You have saved my soul from death. You have saved me from death. Are you not capable of delivering my feet from falling away in the way that Saul did?" Are you not capable of delivering my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? So David, through all his sin, through all of his shortcomings, the murder of Uriah, the covering up of his sin, the adultery with Bathsheba, all of the things that he had done, through all of his shortcomings, he still acknowledged that God had saved his soul and that God would keep him from falling. But we can see that David's heart was one of such that God was first and foremost in his life. He stumbled and he fell and he made lots of mistakes, but God was first and foremost in his life. He was the chiefest motivating factor in his life, and we see that by the fact that every time he stumbles, he constantly comes back to God. Every time he's afraid, he constantly comes back to God. Every time he's blessed, he's constantly going to God and thanking God. And that's really indicative of somebody who God has set up residence in their heart, that they just can't get away. They can't fall away. It's not even up to them. No matter what David did, he could not fall away because God just had a hold of him, and David wasn't going to let that go. So that's something that had really kind of stood out to me, and I wanted to kind of share with you guys today. So anyway, you guys read through Psalm 56 and let me know what your thoughts are. All right, God bless.